Okay, today we will be rebuilding the LSF S250-2, and the tools I have to do it are a hammer, a set of Atlas Copco punches, which are very useful. They have this slider piece on them, 2 different punches. I have the spanner wrench that locks on top of the collet. I have a 9/16, 11/16, a pair of tweezers, and a mandrel for pushing the bearings in a press. So the first thing will be removing the handle, and I'll take the punch and remove the handle. Take the pin out, take the handle off. Next, I have a set of machined vices, machined in a circle, soft jaws. I carefully clamp it in a vise as not to pinch the body of the tool. Next, I will take the spanner wrench, lock it into the top cap, and remove the top cap. Careful not to damage the body. And now I'll remove the collet nut and the collet and the top cap, and remove the motor. That's the motor there. Then I'll take the tweezers and remove the plunger pin. Next, I will be removing the back end and the poppet. The poppet is a valve for the speed. It's 11/16. I just take it and remove the back end. You can clamp it in the vise if necessary, but be sure not to collapse the body. The back end comes out. There's a spring and the poppet. That's the poppet there. There's a seal inside. You can replace the seal by getting a pick and pulling the seal out and replacing it with a new one, if necessary. And you can separate the inner body from the outer. By just pushing it through. If you need to clean it all up, it depends how bad the tool is. But for this purpose, I don't. It just pushes back in. Next, we'll be removing the governor. And what I do is I take a 12mm wrench and hold the collet and take the screwdriver on the back of it, and it's a standard thread, and removing the collet on the back. Be sure not to separate the collet. Separate the governor, I'm sorry. The governor comes right off the back. And that's how it looks without the governor. Next, we will be taking a punch, put it on the inside of the threads, not to damage the threads. We'll be punching this shaft right here, out of this center bearing. I have it in a vise, a set of soft jaw vices, in order to not damage the end plate. Carefully clamp it in a vise. And I will be removing the bearing. I like to hold it from the bottom and hold the punch all at once. Once I get it collapsed, take it out of the vise, pull the punch out, And there's the bearing, the end plate, the cylinder, and the blades. Three blades, and the blades normally you just inspect. Normally inspect the blades for dirt, replace them. Replace the bearings as necessary. Check the end plates for wear. This end plate has 0 wear on it. It's brand new, but if it does, replace it. Next, I will be clamping the rotor in a set of soft jaws, aluminum jaws, in such a way as not to collapse the 3 sections of the rotor. Usually I like to have one space off to the end and the other backside in the center. If you clamp this too hard, you'll destroy the rotor. So I clamp it just enough to get a 12mm wrench on it and remove the collet off the top. It just unscrews. And once that's off, then we can put it in a press and press the end plate off. Okay, here I have a standard press, arbor press, and I have a magnet down underneath on the table to catch the rotor when it comes off. And I usually put it all the way to the back. You can see the magnet caught it. Everything stays right there. There's the bearing, the front end plate. Inspect the bottom of the front end plate for wear, clean if necessary, and inspect the rotor for wear. The top of the rotor. There's a collar here that stays on, that's directional, so pay attention to which way it goes on. Okay, so here is the motor disassembled. You have the collar adapter, the front end bearing, the front end plate, the rotor with the spacer, the vanes, the cylinder, which is directional. Note the little tab on the bottom of the cylinder that connects to the rear end plate. So the cylinder, the rear end plate, the rear ball bearing, and that's it. It just goes together in reverse. Okay, next we're going to press the front end bearing on. So I have the rotor, the spacer, the front end plate with the flat side down towards the vanes, because that has to be smooth for the vanes. The front end plate goes on, and I have a mandrel. The bearing goes on, and then you press it on with the mandrel. Be sure your mandrel clears the shaft, and also be sure that the mandrel presses the inner race of the bearing and not the outer race. I have the small press here. Actually, I'll use the big press. Give you guys a shot here. So I put the bearing down on, then I put the mandrel. Be sure the mandrel doesn't collapse the shield, the metal shield, and be sure it doesn't touch the outer race. And just push it down on. The spacer will do the rest, and that's it. Now we have the bearing all pressed on, ready to go. Now the collet holder gets screwed on in reverse. You clamp it in the vise and tighten this down. And I believe there's a torque spec for the collet holder adapter in Surveyed. All these parts are available with the parts breakdown in Surveyed, and I'll send you the link, or the link will be underneath this video. Okay, so now reassembly of the motor. Install the blades. and then the cylinder, and be sure the notch is towards the bottom end, the back end of the rotor. That's the front end, that's the back end. Here's the notch. I don't know if you can see it, but you'll see it on the rotor, on the cylinder. So you put the cylinder on, and then the rear end plate, the flat side down. There's an opening for grease and oil for a place to go, the flat side down, inside of the notch. And then you use a mandrel to push the inner race of this small bearing. Be sure your mandrel clears the shaft and touches the inner race only. So when you press it, you press the inner race. Okay, so here's the setup on the press. And normally I do not press on the bottom of this collet adapter because it'll crunch it up, you won't get a collet in there. I have a plate that has a hole that it sits straight down in. And you just press it down. So normally what I do is after I press it completely, the cylinder will not turn. So what I do is I just tap it slightly. And when you tap it, it creates the space that you want. It makes it spin nice. And that's it for pressing the motor. You just screw the governor back on and install it back in the tool. Okay. Make sure you have a properly calibrated torque wrench connected to the mandrel, and torque this top collet nut to the proper specifications that are in surveyed. Survey is telling me 25 Newton meters. $10, $20, $5. Very important that it gets torqued to the proper specifications. And then assemble the pin and the handle and the lever and test the tool. So after the tool is completely assembled, you test the tool with an RPM gauge. Now normally come within 80% of the number that's on the tool, the RPMs, based on your air supply. I'm getting 24,000 RPMs. Hope this helps.